Welcome to Facebook Live. Larry Holder, Josh Katzenstein here with you as the Saints just wrapped up their sixth practice at the Greenbrier here at White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. And if you have any questions throughout this Facebook Live chat, we will experiment, because that's what Facebook Live is, total experimentation. We will have one or two questions, maybe three. If your questions stink, they're not getting on here. That's just the way it's going to be. But let's just start off with injury news, some positive injury news for the Saints. Let's start off with the guys who we know we're going to be seeing snaps in the regular season. Keenan Lewis, Nick Fairley, Eric Harris, all three return to practice. Keenan Lewis off the PUP list.
Yeah, absolutely. And Keenan Lewis coming back is huge because as much as the Saints want P.J. Williams involved in his second year, I think the expectation is that he's probably their top nickel cornerback. So getting Keenan Lewis allows, P.J. Williams to do more work in the slot, and Keenan will be working on the outside, and that's where they expect those guys to be playing this season. So the more time they can spend doing that in training camp, the more it's going to pay off during the regular season. And then Fairley comes back. He wasn't really repping with the ones much because Tyler Davison, who you just wrote about today, was looking great today. He's been looking good for most of camp, and then Sheldon Rankins was out there as well. So Fairley was back with the twos, trying to get his legs back under him. But either way, he's going to be involved in the rotation. And Eric Harris, who you also mentioned, he jumped right back in there, got some reps with the ones too. So, it seems like they're really high on him coming out of the CFL, and definitely having all three of those guys back, I think it's definitely good news for the Saints. And really at this point, besides Teron Armstead and obviously Kikaha, I think, this is a pretty healthy team.
Yeah, and you look at Harris, plays a lot of three safety sets, so he's been heavily involved in that throughout training camp. You also look at what Keenan Lewis did, had some snaps with the ones, and then you mentioned P.J. Williams. Look, him and Damian Swan are competing, but right now I'd probably say P.J. Williams has had the better part of this camp. But I think the important thing is Keenan Lewis. Got to get his legs under him, got to make sure he can still play and stay healthy and stay on the field, because the Saints, if they could get the guy they saw in 2013 and 2014, this secondary core, specifically at cornerback, is starting to kind of shape up, and you look like you have some good options there.
Yeah, and if he's healthy and playing as he did in 2013, and if Delvin Breaux is playing how he did last year, suddenly that's a pretty strong duo, which is something the Saints really couldn't claim at all last year. Brandon Browner might have been the worst cornerback in the league who started as much as he did.
Not might have been.
Yeah.
Worst,
right, yeah.
Yes.
You can't be doing this every play.
Why not? You can get away with it. Come on. No.
First 5 yards maybe, but it seemed like, guys we don't need to rag on Brandon Browner anymore. People know why he's no longer with this team. But suddenly, if Keenan Lewis is healthy, playing well, and then if Jairus Byrd can finally do what the Saints paid him to do a couple years ago, suddenly that's a pretty strong secondary, because you got Kenny Vaccaro blowing people up. He's already started doing that in camp here. And then, Eric Harris might be able to contribute. Roman Harper can contribute. All of a sudden, that's a somewhat deep secondary. And after, being second to last in pretty much every passing category last year, that would be huge for this team.
And a guy that we didn't mention just now in that safety talk, who came up with his second interception of training camp, one off of a deep ball, Garrett Grayson, is Von Bell. And you just wrote about him a couple days ago. Just kind of, if people missed your story, just kind of let them know what you wrote about and your comparison to him.
Well, yeah, I compared him to Demarius Randall, he's now second year player for the Green Bay Packers. He was a first-round pick last year. He was a safety in college, but he comes in and he plays a lot of nickel cornerback because he has speed, he has cover skills, and really once you break down the height, weight, speed, athleticism, Randall and Von Bell are really comparable, and it would seem that, a second-round pick in Von Bell, the Saints would want to get him on the field right away. So, yeah, we're talking about P.J. Williams being the nickel cornerback, but suddenly if Von Bell keeps making these plays, he's going to have to be on the field. And if Jairus Byrd is healthy and Vaccaro is healthy, the best way to do that might be in nickel package.
I think Jairus Byrd may actually be the part where that hinders some of this stuff, because you have these young guys, and yet you've got all this money invested in Jairus Byrd. If he's healthy, you got to play him at least this year. But who knows? Von Bell, we know he's going to be their safety of the future. Now let's move all offensively. To me, I think of skill position guys today that stood out, and is really kind of securing that number 5 wide receiver spot as R.J. Harris. Made a couple of great catches today and has really done well throughout much of this camp.
Yeah, it's hard to remember sometimes that there's other receivers on the field besides Michael Thomas. And I think part of that is because I think people started to take Brandon Cooks for granted. Willie Snead is, almost just as consistent as Cooks is. So then Thomas is the one, impressing. But yeah, R.J. Harris today, I would say, had the best plays out of that wide receiver group. Made a couple diving catches. On one of them, he got right up, and Kenny Vaccaro was like, no, you're not running anymore. But no, I think he's definitely helped himself. And honestly, Brandon Coleman still has not been consistent through a full practice. So we're saying they're competing for the number 5 job, but really that number 4 job, I would say, shouldn't be locked down.
Right, and you look at offensively, what we saw as far as offensive line play. You mentioned a little bit about Tyler Davison really blowing things up, and that was really my lead practice observation. I think for the first time, especially in the individual drills, we saw both Tim Lolito and Senio Kelemete have a little bit of issues, which you don't want one side to win every day. So at some point this is going to happen. But it just goes to show you that none of these guys are full-blown, guaranteed starters. They're still competing. And look, they're a reason why they're competing, because both have positive points and both are flawed at some points.
Yeah, absolutely. And Senio Kelemete, the way he was talking today, it sounds like all he is thinking about is winning that left guard job. And the way he was talking, the way he was saying it was him and Tim Lolito competing for the left guard job, it sounds like they're resigned to the fact that Andres Pete is probably going to be the starting right guard. So they know they're competing for one spot. And I think most of us knew that coming into camp. But, I mean, you would think that, even though he's a first-round pick, that, those guys would be confident that, they can at least compete with him. But right now, I think every expectation is that Pete will be there. I would say that, Senio definitely has a leg up on Tim Lolito, but, neither of them was that great. But let's throw it to our producer real quick, Amos Morale, behind the camera. Let's see if we have any questions.
If healthy, where would you rank the Saints' defensive backfield as a whole?
Now, I would say as a whole, the defensive backfield, if they're healthy, that's a strength on this team. I would think that would be the least question mark group of them all. And you might go back to front. I would maybe say DBs, linebackers. I think they're looking good there. I think the big question is that defensive front. But, in my eyes, I think that DB group would be the best group secondary as far as safety, corner are concerned as a whole.
I don't know. I think if healthy, I do think defensively the DBs would be the best group. But I think you still got to put the defensive line ahead of the linebackers, because Cameron Jordan is probably the best player on the defense. So even though they don't know what they have yet in Sheldon Rankins or Nick Fairley or even Tyler Davison for that matter, I still think having Cameron Jordan makes things easier for everyone else up there. So that's a group that can be relied upon. And the other part of that is, as good as the linebackers have looked, specifically Donnell Ellerbe and Craig Robertson, who used to play for the Browns, James Laurinaitis, who seems to be penciled in for a starting job, he stood no chance covering Mark Ingram today in a couple one-on-one drills. So that obviously could be an issue, and they'd have to find someone who can cover at that spot.
Well, any more questions, or we got one more? CJ Spiller, look, I think he's I was down on him going into this camp, and other places like to take that and make a story out of it, and maybe I made a little story about it. Maybe. Hey, it was just my opinion. But I think he has looked more fresh than maybe I anticipated. So what are your thoughts just seeing him in these first 6 days of camp?
Well, I mean, he was saying when camp started that he didn't lack the straight line speed. It was just his cutting ability that he didn't quite have last year. And I think today especially, and then a couple other practices before now, we saw that he's definitely cutting quickly in short area, and I think those are the things that make CJ Spiller. The problem is it's hard to rely on him when it's been years since he's done anything consistently. Plus, for the most part, if you're giving CJ Spiller the ball, that means you're not giving Mark Ingram the ball. And I think no matter how improved CJ Spiller has looked, Mark Ingram looks like the best running back on the field every day.
Absolutely. Well, it's going to wrap it up here at our Real World White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia house. It's still standing, so that's a plus. But for Josh Katzenstein, I'm Larry Holder. Again, check out all of our coverage of all things Saints at NOLA.com and in our print editions of the Times-Picayune. And again, after each practice, we'll be here.